Good morning all. Glad to see all the plumbers that work in our industry attend today's session. This is the 18th of a series of National Construction Code seminars we've run around the state. They've been well attended. It's been really pleasing for me personally and for the VBA to have the number of attendees attend all our sessions that we've conducted throughout the whole state of Victoria. My name is Matt Wilson. I'm a senior tech advisor with the Victorian Building Authority in the Plumbing Tech and Reg Department. I've been with the VBA for coming up to 20 years. Prior to that, I worked as a plumbing inspector with Melbourne Water and the Melbourne Metropolitan Board of Works. My father was a plumber, and I've worked in the plumbing industry since 1974. And the majority of my working life was in the commercial industrial field, in multi-storey, particularly in relation to hospital, where I did a lot of hospital work and a lot of work in the hospital industry. Now, we want to talk about some issues in relation to the National Construction Code, and our topics that we cover in today's session are the Victorian Plumbing Regulatory Framework, changes that have been introduced into the Plumbing Code of Australia 2019. We'll have a short presentation from Paul Harris from Energy Safe Victoria on gas installations in the complex gas installation field. After that, we'll have a short break in the foyer. And after the break, we'll outline the process that is required to develop a performance solution when you are certifying your work under the performance solution pathway through the National Construction Code. We'll provide an update on changes to the modification application process when you are building over a shared or combined property service drain. We'll also provide an update on common issues that have been identified in the plumbing audit program that we conduct throughout the state. And finally, an update on plumbing investigations and the process when we develop a brief of evidence in relation to defective or illegal plumbing work. So first up, I'd like to provide an overview of the plumbing regulatory framework and what you need to know as plumbers working in the state of Victoria. Now, the plumbing regulatory framework underpins all of the legal and technical aspects of regulated plumbing work in the state. It helps us provide an understanding of how the plumbing industry is designed to operate and how you as practitioners need to work within the confines of the law. In Victoria, the Building Act 1993 and the Plumbing Regulations 2018 are the key legislative and regulatory documents that set out all of the requirements for plumbing work that we conduct. In other words, these are the plumbing laws that govern all of the plumbing work that we do. Now, first up, I want to talk about the Building Act 1993. The Building Act is a legal document that contains over 600 pages of provisions that govern all building and plumbing activity in the state. The broad objectives of the Act are to ensure that the health and safety of people who use buildings and places of entertainment, and to enhance the amenity and safety of all the buildings that we occupy. Of specific importance to us as plumbers are the provisions in Part 12A of the Building Act. Now, Part 12A of the Act sets out the framework for the regulation of the plumbing industry, and this is not to be confused with the other parts of the Building Act 1993 that define the responsibilities that are set down for other practitioners in the building industry, such as building surveyors and commercial or domestic builders. Now let's take a look at the Plumbing Regulations 2018 because they provide us with the specific information about plumbing and plumbing laws, and I'll go on to the next slide. Now, the key functions of the plumbing regulations are to specify all of the classes of plumbing work that are regulated plumbing work in the state of Victoria, and that includes their scope. One of the requirements of the building regulations and the plumbing regulations is to specify the qualifications and experience required for any person to be registered or licensed to carry out a class or each class of plumbing work, and they are required to incorporate the requirements of the Plumbing Code of Australia and set standards and other requirements that registered or licensed practitioners must comply with when they are carrying out your plumbing work. Now, this slide shows how the documents are linked. I previously spoke about the Building Act 1993 and the Plumbing Regulations 2018 in the previous slide. I'd now like to explain how they are linked and how the documents work within each other. As previously mentioned, the Plumbing Code of Australia is adopted by the Plumbing Regulations 2018. The technical reference documents, such as the handbooks that we use, or standards, such as the AS/NCC 3500 suite of standards, are called up directly within the Plumbing Code of Australia. Now, that's volume 3 of the Plumbing Code of Australia, as indicated on the screen. The Plumbing Code of Australia is volume 3 of the National Construction Code. Volumes 1 and 2 are the Building Construction Requirements or Building Code of Australia. All of those documents are available for free to download from the Australian Building Code's website, as are the Plumbing Regulations and the Building Regulations are free documents that you can download from Legislate Victoria. Technical reference documents such as the AS 3500 series are Standards Australia and SIO Global published documents. In addition, there are other documents that are also called up within the Plumbing Regulations 2018, such as our handbooks, HB 276 and HB 39. Now, concluding this introduction to the plumbing regulatory framework, it's important to also understand where the deemed to satisfy provisions come from and where performance requirements come from. Now, a standard, an Australian standard or a handbook is a legislated document that is a deemed to satisfy document that you work to. And later in the presentation, we'll also discuss the development of the performance solution and the performance solution pathway and any required supporting documentation you need to prepare and submit with your compliance certificate if you are going to certify your work as a performance through that pathway. Now, I want to talk about changes to the Plumbing Code of Australia in particular in the 2019 version of the National Construction Code. There have been a few changes to the PCA, which will change the way you need to do your plumbing work. Some of the information has been moved within the document, and they've either been reorganised into their own sections, or they've been moved to the Victorian appendix at the rear of the book. And there are some changes to the requirements for heated water temperature and accessible facilities, cross-connection control, noise transfer prevention, and drains from evap coolers have been changed within the National Construction Code. There's a number of standards that have been added to the Plumbing Code of Australia as deemed to satisfy installation standards, and one standard has been removed from the National Construction Code in the PCA. And we'll now discuss these changes in some more detail. Now, finding info in the PCA that has been moved and placed in the book where you now found is different. Some of the requirements used to be repeated in every section of the Plumbing Code of Australia, but these now have their own separate sections. And these separate sections are cross-connection control requirements, rainwater harvesting and reuse, the requirements for avoiding excessive noise transfer in buildings, and accessible facilities for persons with a disability. The intent of these changes is to make it easier to find the information within the National Construction Code and the PCA, therefore making the document more readable to practitioners. Now, some aspects of the plumbing work are regulated in a different way in Victoria compared to the other states in Australia. The requirements for this work are now found at the back of the book in what we call the Victorian appendices, titled Victorian Variations and Additions. And they are additions and variations to the stormwater drainage systems in Victoria, including roof plumbing, heating, ventilation and air conditioning systems, and low-risk on-site trade waste systems. A number of new requirements have also been introduced in the PCA in the 2019 version. The key new requirements relate to heated water services, cross-connection control, excessive noise prevention, and heating, ventilation and air conditioning systems. There is also a clarification on stormwater roofing requirements in the PCA. Now, there are new requirements for the supply of heated water delivery temperatures limited to 45 degrees C in accessible facilities in buildings for people with a disability that has been expanded in the 2009 version of the National Construction Code PCA. There are now more classes of buildings where this is a requirement, and you need to be clearly aware of these requirements and changes. ASNZS 3500 Part 4 requires water temperatures to be delivered at 45 degrees at sanitary fixtures used by the aged, sick, children or people with disabilities in healthcare and aged care buildings, nursing homes, early childhood centres, primary and secondary schools or any other similar facility. Now, these requirements still apply, such as new hot water temperatures, but they also must be limited to 45 degrees in any designated accessible facility in any common area of a Class 2 building. And Class 2 buildings are multi-unit apartment buildings. The common areas in these buildings could include bathrooms or toilet facilities in pool areas, on rooftop gardens, shared garden facilities on the ground, foyers, shared laundries or other similar facilities in these buildings. These requirements now also apply to designated accessible facilities in any part of a Class 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9A, 9B or Class 10 building. And the definitions for these classes of buildings are contained also within the Plumbing Code of Australia. This means that water temperatures must be limited to 45 degrees C in any designated accessible facility in any building, except where they are private homes or private apartments within the building. This includes accessible or disabled facilities in hotels that are Class 3 buildings, offices that will be Class 5 buildings, shops that will be listed as Class 6, car parks in buildings that are Class 7, factories and warehouses that will be Class 8, in sporting facilities in any building, restaurants and in train stations. Now, to follow on that, to achieve a maximum of 45 degrees delivery temperature, you must install either a thermostatic mixing valve or a thermostatically controlled mixing tap. You are not permitted to use a tempering valve, as it is not an approved method to meet the 45 degree temperature delivery requirements as set down in the standard. Now, I'll now like to run through some new requirements that have come into play for the requirements for cross-connection control in Victoria. Cross-connection hazard ratings for common fixtures and appliances are now also listed within the Plumbing Code of Australia. These hazard ratings must be used when you select your backflow prevention device for your installations. If a particular appliance or fixture that you are installing or working on is not listed in the PCA, you will need to keep doing what you currently do, and that would be to establish the hazard rating for that particular installation by referring back to ASNZS 3500 Part 1. There are hazard ratings for individual protection, for zone protection installations, and for containment protection at the meter assembly. Common appliances and fixtures are now listed in the PCA as low, medium or high hazard. And for example, if we were installing an external hose bib or a hose tap as an example, We can now look under the individual protection requirements in the PCA and see that it is in the low hazard section. We then can choose the required low hazard backflow prevention device from the table in NZS 3500 Part 1. Now the next section's in relation to a specific new requirement that is important for plumbing practitioners to understand the consequences of not installing to these new requirements. We need to run through the new requirements that are designed to reduce the likelihood of excessive noise transfer in buildings. The new requirements in Volume 3 of the National Construction Code, or the PCA, are designed to ensure that plumbing systems do not create or transfer undue noise in the building. The performance requirements listed in the PCA are DP 1.1, undue noise, where a plumbing and drainage system must be designed, constructed and installed in a manner that does not create undue noise. And the second deemed to satisfy performance requirement is plumbing and drainage systems that must be designed to reduce the transmission of airborne or impact generated noise or sound which may cause illness or loss of amenity to a building's occupants. Now this means that plumbing systems must be separated from the neighbouring houses or units with sound insulating walls. These requirements are not new. They are already part of the National Construction Code in Volumes 1 and 2, the Building Code of Australia, which builders must follow. But they are now also requirements in Volume 3, and plumbers need to be aware of these requirements. These plumbing noise requirements also apply to will apply to water supply systems, sanitary plumbing systems, and drainage piping systems, including downpipes. There are new requirements for ordinary houses that share a separating wall, and some different requirements for multi-unit residential buildings. And this will include hotels and healthcare buildings. Ordinary houses in the PCA are referred to as Class 1 dwellings. Multi-unit buildings, accommodation buildings and healthcare buildings are listed as Class 2, Class 3 and Class 9C buildings. Now we're going to go through some examples of some installations. Clearly we can't cover all of the requirements in the standard or in the National Construction Code, but we'll give a couple of examples to try and give you some understanding of what the requirements will be moving forward. Let's start with Class 1 houses that share a separating wall. Up till now, correct pressures, flow rates and pipe support systems were used to make sure that plumbing systems were not too noisy. There are now extra installation requirements that you need to consider. The new noise requirements now apply to separating or adjoining walls in Class 1 buildings, as you can see on the screen. Now to meet those noise requirements for Class 1 buildings, the Plumbing Code of Australia now lists 4 deemed to satisfy installation requirements. And we'll now go through each of the 4 deemed to satisfy requirements in a little bit more detail. They're listed above in sections 1, 2, 3 and 4 in the paragraphs, but I'll go through them individually. The first deemed to satisfy requirement for a Class 1 building is that the separating wall must have a cavity where the 2 sides are separated by a minimum of 20 millimetres, as indicated in the slide. The second deemed to satisfy installation requirement in the National Construction Code is that there must be a gap of at least 10 millimetres between the outer wall of a pipe and the neighbour's side of that wall. The pipe cannot be fixed to the side of the wall that belongs to the neighbour's house, as indicated in the slide. I'll just let you have a look at that one. Pipework installed in these Class 1 buildings must not be chased into any separating wall that is constructed of concrete or brick. Now we'll look at the requirements for multi-unit buildings that will include apartment buildings that are Class 2, Class 3 buildings such as hotels, and healthcare buildings that will be 9C. Up till now, we also used correct pressures, flow rates and pipe support systems in these buildings to make sure that plumbing systems were not noisy. So we piped our systems with clips and clip heads that had some insulating properties. But now there are extra requirements for these pipework systems also, and drainage systems that must be separated from neighbouring units by walls that stop the sound passing through those walls. When plumbing work is in a wall, floor or ceiling passing next to a habitable room, like a bedroom or a living room in a neighbour's apartment, the sound rating must be not less than 40. And where plumbing passes next to a kitchen or a non-habitable room like a bathroom or a laundry, the sound rating must be not less than 25. Now we'll look at a couple of examples to demonstrate these new requirements. First, we are installing pipes next to a habitable room between two apartments. Let's say that you're installing new pipework in an apartment that's indicated in yellow on the screen. Now the neighbour's apartment's indicated in blue. Now the pipework being installed by the practitioner here is running beside the neighbour's bedroom in that adjoining apartment. And because a bedroom is a habitable room in that adjoining apartment, the plumbing work must be separated from the other apartment by a wall that has a sound insulation rating of at least 40. Now we'll look at a different example where the plumbing passes to a non-habitable room in a neighbour's adjoining apartment. The floor plan of the neighbour's apartment is different, and the plumbing is passing by a bathroom and a hallway. Where the plumbing is in a wall, floor or ceiling that is next to a non-habitable room in the neighbour's apartment, it must be separated from the neighbour's apartment by a wall that has a sound insulation rating of at least 25. Now we did consider putting some examples of sound insulation walls or the rating walls in the standard, but they are referred to in National Construction Code Volume 2, and as I said before, it is a free document that you can download from the ABCB website. The sound insulation rating, all sound insulation rating of walls can be found within the National Construction Code Volume 1. And in Volume 1, the specification F5.2 gives the sound insulation ratings of some common types of wall construction you will find in multi-unit buildings. And that's Volume 2 as indicated on the scroll, Volume 1 of the National Construction Code. Now I want to now run through some new requirements for heating, ventilation and air conditioning systems. There is a new standard available that is called up in the legislation which gives an overview of requirements for the installation of residential heating and cooling systems. It's born out of HB 276, our handbook that is called up by the Plumbing Regulations 2018, and it covers ducted and non-ducted air conditioning systems and reverse cycle heat pumps. It also covers gas ducted heating systems. There are only limited specific requirements in this standard. It mostly refers to other standards that give you the requirements for the installation of the ductwork, such as 4254, for piping systems, structural supports, and for refrigerant gas handling. ASNZS 5141 was published late last year and it's available through Standards Australia. The National Construction Code and the PCAs also now has a deemed to satisfy installation requirement for the termination of a drain from an evap cooler. The VBA has always considered that an evap cooler can discharge onto a tiled roof via a spreader, but it was never in any of our guides or in our sandbooks, so we put it into the PCA as an acceptable, deemed to satisfy requirement. The PCA confirms that an evap cooler may discharge over a tiled roof by way of a spreader. but please be aware that this only applies to an evap cooler spreader that discharges on a tile roof, not onto a metallic roof. There's a short information sheet that will be in your pack which summarises the content of this change. I want to now run through a clarification that's been made to stormwater roofing requirements in the Plumbing Code of Australia. The requirements for gutters and downpipes were previously located in the National Construction Code Volume 2, as well as the National Construction Code Volume 3. And this caused ongoing problems between builders, building surveyors and plumbers, where we sometimes looked at different requirements for the same plumbing work. With the PCA 2019 changes, the requirements for eave gutters, box gutters and downpipes are now consolidated into Volume 3 of the National Construction Code, the PCA. And this means that the installation requirements for downpipes and gutters and the spacing of downpipes installed in Victoria should now be clearer. Plumbers should refer to the Plumbing Code of Australia to install their work. The Victorian Section F particularly, which directs you to follow the requirements of AS/NZS 3500 Part 3. Through our Plumbing Regulations 2018, you can also refer to HB 114 and HB 39. One of the most important clarifications this change should make is that the maximum spacing often referred to by building surveyors of 12 metre spacings, or having a downpipe close to the internal corner of a valley gutter, often raised as an installation requirement, should now be clearer. It has not been a requirement in Victoria because we always adopted AS 3500 Part 3, not the requirements of the National Construction Code and the BCA. Now, there's also some standards changes within the PCA. One old reference standard has been removed. Has anyone in the audience ever used Volume 5 of the 3500 series, AS/NZS Volume 5? That's probably why it's not being continued. Volume 3 was designed to be a handbook for plumbers to use for domestic installations. It's now considered to be out of date and can no longer be used. It is not a deemed to satisfy standard anymore. Parts 1 to 4 of the AS 3500 series should be used instead. They will cover the wide range of all plumbing work, whether it's residential, domestic or commercial, and are still appropriate for all of the domestic plumbing work you carry out in the state. And that's the volume as on the screen. It was a small handbook published by Standard, and the last publication was 2012. There are also two new important standards for plumbers to be aware of. They are two new standards for automatic fire sprinkler systems that have been included in the Plumbing Code of Australia. They are designed for use in Class 2 and 3 buildings that are under 25 metres in height. Class 2 and 3 buildings will be multi-unit residential buildings that include apartments, hotels and boarding houses. These new standards are designed to provide a more cost-effective installation option for fire sprinklers in medium-rise residential buildings. Practitioners who work in this area should be familiar with the content of these new standards because they are based on modified versions of existing AS 2118 sprinkler standards. The first standard is FPAA 101D, Automatic Fire Sprinkler System Design and Installation from Drinking Water Supplies. It is used for systems that are fed by the drinking water supply and are connected so that the water supply to the toilets, or are connected so as to supply water supply to the toilets in each unit. FPAA 101D indicates that all components downstream of the backflow prevention device on that supply, including sprinkler heads, must be watermark approved. So the entire piping system, including sprinkler heads on a combined system, is required to be watermarked. The second standard is FPAA 101H, Automatic Fire Sprinkler System Design and Installation Hydrant Water Supply. This allows for systems to be fed from a hydrant system rather than from a dedicated sprinkler supply. And while a combined hydrant or combined hydrant system standard already exists, that being AS 2118.6. This new standard is designed for higher capacity installations in taller buildings. There have also been some changes made to the building requirements over the types of buildings that will require sprinkler protection. Previously, only buildings that were over 25 metres high needed sprinkler protection, as indicated on the slide. Now, Class 2 and 3 residential buildings that are 4 storeys or higher will also need sprinkler protection. Fire sprinkler systems will be designed by a fire engineer and specified in the building permit conditions. Practitioners just need to be aware that they might be asked to install sprinkler systems that have been designed to one of these 2 new standards. Now this now concludes the summary of the key changes to the Plumbing Code of Australia 2019, and we have handouts available that if they're not in your pack already in relation to the things that I've spoken about. I'd now like to invite Paul Harris from Energy Safe Victoria to the stage, who will provide a short presentation on changes to complex gas fitting work in the state.
Okay, first off, ESV would like to take the opportunity to thank all you that have given up your time today to come and listen to our presentation. We feel that it's, it is a big part of your day. We understand that you're not making money while you're sitting in here, but it is very important that we as ESV do get our message out around the gas safety and gas safety programs that are presently just been launched. So thank you for attending, and hopefully if you don't do gas work, you can probably relax now for a little bit and just refresh your brain. If you do gas work, if you could listen up, and we'll run through some of the activity that we've been doing of late around gas track and also CO campaigns. So the first bit of information I did want to put out there was that GasTrack is our online application system. It's run up until April. It was run, you could either put in online or we were still processing gas applications for you. As of 19th of April on Easter, we went fully online. So from now on, any new gas application must be done online. It lives its whole entire life online. You can't start it online and then start sending us information in. It's a fully integrated system of which you can do all the things you need to do to progress your application through to final acceptance. If you've got one that's been created by ESV that's still live and working, you can still continue to send that stuff into us, and we can attach that. So any new ones need to be fully online. So that just means email, fax, hard copy ones are no longer accepted. New gas applications are accepted. To assist you with that, GasTrack has, on our website, there is some instructional videos around how to use GasTrack. They're a series of about 20-odd short videos. They're named, intuitively named, so hopefully you can have a look and see where you are in our system and then click on that, and that'll step you through being able to sign up on GasTrack and then progress your applications. It also allows you to manage your applications, or all of your applications. So we would encourage you, if you're not on there already, to get yourself sorted in that. And if there is any issues, by all means give us a call. Matty. Oh, so some key tips on GasTrack. It is a browser-based application, and Google Chrome is probably the best browser base to use on it. It does need to have your date format on your browser set to date, month and year format. Otherwise, it does, at our end, it does some strange little things in your process. So please set that format. It also needs to be pop-ups enabled and not being overly computer switched on. I believe that when you go into your browser, when you go into our stuff, it'll ask you whether this is a browser based and it needs pop-ups enabled, and it'll walk you through enabling your pop-ups. As always, if you're experiencing any difficulties, give us a ring. Go onto the videos on the website. Give Lenny a call on the 1-800 number. In actual fact, if you go on the 1-800 and it's a gas track issue, select 4 and you'll probably end up talking to Margaret, who will try to walk you through your problems. As always, ESV are here to help. We don't want to become a hindrance to your business, and we do believe that from feedback we've had from industry from day dot of gas track going live, most people get to be able to use it fairly easily and have had success with managing their own jobs with that. Okay, now on to what's probably the most important part of our messaging here. As you're aware, last year ESV VBA Master Plumbers run a very big campaign on CO and negative pressure, as a result of the unfortunate death of a lady in the Department of Housing. So as a result of that, through the investigation, it turned out that the Vulcan Pyrox heater had a fault under negative pressure. So it didn't actually have a fault as such, but it didn't operate as it should have under a very slight negative pressure. That raised some concerns to us around the testing, so we requested that all assessment bodies reassess every gas heater, open fluid gas heater they have on their books. So all open fluid gas heaters were put through their reassessment. It's fair to say that for ESV there was an alarming number of units that failed that assessment, of which we immediately banned the sale of, until such time as the manufacturers come up with a fix for them, of which they have. So what we now have is we have a information sheet flyer in your pack, which will outline the number of heaters that have got an issue, what to do when you present to your client's house with them. But I'll give you a little rundown on it. Vulcan Pyrox, the heater that caused the sad death, the advice from ESV would be, in all cases, if you can, isolate it until such time Vulcan Pyrox can get out there. If it is looking like it's about had its use by date, so if it's looking a little bit tardy, convince your client that it's probably time to replace that with a new heater. Where possible, get them out of lounge rooms. Results of the recall have shown that about 50% of them are being isolated anyway by climate technology. So again, if you're in the lounge room and it's looking like it's had its use by date, I would strongly suggest to your clients that it's time to replace that unit. But in all cases, please, where they will allow you, isolate it and tell them to ring climate technologies if they're going to continue to use it. The rest of the units on the flyer, they all have fixes. So what we would suggest there is service them, do the CO test and the negative pressure test, and then advise your client to contact the manufacturer to come out and do the fix. So that's the best way to go about them. But again, I reiterate, the Vulcan Pyrox, isolate where possible, and replace if possible. The next one we really wanted to do, and we're a couple of months into this program, so this one was really just around, are you winter ready? So last year we worked around doing a big push on carbon monoxide safety program with the master plumbers. So this was just to say, look, if you're doing this work regularly, make sure you've gone back onto the website, had a look at all the information that ESV and VBA make available. We've got the ESV negative pressure video, there's the VBA CO testing video. Most importantly, information sheet 38 has been slightly amended again. After every winter, from feedback from industry and others, we assess what we've been telling industry, and as a result of that, one of the things we realised what we'd done. So last year, if you don't remember the seminars, it was carry out the negative pressure test. If you had a negative pressure, open the window slightly, get rid of the negative pressure, and then test the heater for CO spillage. And if there was no CO spillage, we had a co-branded letter that said, look, if they won't let you cut the ventilation in to alleviate the negative pressure, then hand them the letter, explain to them the dangers, but it would be okay to leave it on for a very short period of time while you had time to cut the ventilation and so forth, notify the VBA. What we realised was we hadn't really tested that heater under its worst case scenario, which is actually negative pressure, operating under negative pressure. So now the test actually asks for you to do that. In doing that, you just need to be mindful that you are potentially exposing yourself to some form of CO if that unit does spill under negative pressure. But what we believe, and one of the reasons why we chose only to roll this out now, is we believe that we've spent a lot of time training and educating the plumbers on and the correct test equipment, having it calibrated, that we're far more suited to be able to do this test and be aware of our own safety implications and so forth. So just be mindful that under a negative pressure environment, you are testing to see if that heater is spilling CO. There is a potential, so if it is, you need to stop your test immediately. You know, if the levels are going up, stop your test immediately, advise the consumer, establish why it is. It may be negative pressure, it may just be there's a fault with the heater, so then eliminate it in the negative pressure by turning fans off. And do the test again. If it's not spilling, then it was the negative pressure causing you the problem. That is all stepped out. But what we have done, and it's really, if you're doing this work, there's these pads. We've created a CO spillage test report sheet. If you follow that sheet, that'll step you through the new information sheet 38, step by step. We've had some feedback from industry that seems to be positive. They seem to think it's made it a lot easier to follow. But again, as always, if you are doing this work all the time and you grab one of these sheets, please feel free to let ESV know if you think there's an improvement or there's an issue with that sheet. We're more than happy to get that feedback. The other one is just a friendly reminder to make sure your CO analysers have been calibrated before you go sort of using them, or if you are using them now and they're outside their year calibration, probably best you get them booked in for a calibration. But again, our winter campaign has just launched. You would have hopefully you would have heard it on the radio, possibly seen it on the TV, and it's got a slight different spin this year. It's actually trying to convince the consumer that they own some of this. You know, they're the ones that can actually, pick the phone up and call a plumber in to service the gas heater. Every 2 years, gas heaters should be serviced, including these checks. So that is the campaign as such. Matthew's moving me on quickly. Okay, the last one was, and every year I stand up at these seminars and we talk about our industry and some of the facts around our non-compliance. Previously, we've reported that it was running at about 30% non-compliance. We've done some further work on that, so we're down to about 23%. Someone in the audience once asked, well, what is an acceptable percentage? One would like to say 0 is an acceptable percentage, but there's ESV have set a goal of getting it down to 15% in the next couple of years. So again, that will need some form of strategy around that. But what we have found from our data is that 30% of all non-compliances are found in commercial kitchens, and then 50% of all non-compliances are related to kitchens in one way, shape or form. So with that, we're in the process of developing a training module, and we've asked that the RTOs come back to us to price out providing that as a free training seminar to you guys that are doing this work regularly. So hopefully in the second, coming up around the Christmas period or just after, we'll look to launch something that will give some training in commercial kitchens to try and get that right. ESV's strategy around any non-compliant stuff is educate. So in this space, we've got technical information sheets. We do have a video on commercial kitchens. We do the road shows. We go out to RTOs and talk to the kids. We've also set up a commercial kitchen check sheet, self-audit sheet. So we would suggest that if you're doing this work and you get one of those sheets, just have a read of it and fill it in. You know, you sort of get an indication no one's read the sheet when it says pick one of the boxes and all 3 boxes are ticked. It's just become a process of ticking it to feed it back into us. And then, you know, surprise, surprise, we go out and inspect and we end up with non-compliances. So we do give a lot of information to try and get your experience with our gas inspector to be a good experience. But unfortunately, if people are not reading the information or taking the advice on, then non-compliances will continue to be part and parcel. And then that comes down to our enforcement strategy. At the moment, we have 3 zero tolerance enforcements, which are gas leak. Anyone presents a job and it has a gas leak, you can expect a please explain letter and more than likely an infringement notice. The failed second inspection, so if you've been out on site with our inspector, we've issued you a non-compliance that told you the clause, we've had to talk to you about what was required, and then you present that a second time and it's wrong, we will again issue a show cause and then more than likely you will receive an infringement notice. And the third one is grease filters, distance from grease filters to ranges. And shortly we'll be looking at flexible hoses because they are just getting flung in any way, shape and form. They're kinked, they're pushed back at the heater, they're crushed, they're lying on the floor. So we're looking to amend the standard to make it a little bit more prescriptive of what is a compliant installation. We have a preferred installation sheet that we send out with gas applications, but that will be probably our next zero tolerance. Now I say all that to you guys, understanding that, you know, you've given up your time and you are the practitioners that probably heed this, and I'm preaching to the converted. You know, out of the 19,000 licensed plumbers we have, or licensed registered plumbers, we probably get 1,000 turn up to these seminars. So I do apologise that the message is always out to you guys, but I just wanted to make you aware that those are the way ESV go about driving compliance or behavioural change. And if you happen to talk to any guys that are not here, it would be good if you could pass that message on.